The courtroom was packed with people, their hushed conversations bouncing off the walls, creating a tense atmosphere. Phillip Matthews, sitting on the defendant's bench, appeared calm on the surface, but the worry in his eyes told a different story. His old worn suit looked like it had been through a lot, and a simple necklace dangled from his neck. Though it seemed unimportant to most in the room, it held a meaning that only one person truly understood. Judge Mary dos Santos entered the room with a steady, confident stride, her posture showcasing her many years of judicial experience. But on this particular day, there was something off, a heaviness in her gaze that she couldn't shake. As she sat down and her eyes fell on Phillip, her breath caught in her throat. She spotted the necklace, and her heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. The necklace Phillip wore was exactly like the one her daughter Louise had on the day she vanished 12 years ago. Mary fought to keep her emotions in check, but her trembling hands revealed the storm brewing inside her. As the prosecutor began his opening remarks, Mary found it impossible to focus. Her eyes were locked on the necklace, and memories of Louise wearing it, beaming with hope and dreams, rushed back with overwhelming force. The prosecutor's voice faded into a distant hum as Mary was consumed by the sudden rush of emotions. She felt a wave of dizziness, the image of the necklace dragging her into a spiral of painful memories and unresolved guilt. Her thoughts raced, making connections she had never considered before. How had Phillip come to possess that necklace? Could he be involved in her daughter's disappearance? The very idea that this man might have played a part in taking her daughter away made her stomach churn. She tried to breathe deeply, but the air in the room felt thin. The walls seemed to close in, and her vision blurred. Then, without any warning, Mary collapsed. Panic erupted in the courtroom. People shouted in shock, and the lawyers and security guards rushed to help. Phillip sat frozen, his eyes wide in confusion and fear as chaos unfolded around him. The trial was quickly adjourned, and Mary was taken to the hospital. Phillip was led back to his cell, still puzzled by what had just happened. To him, the necklace had always been a simple token of friendship, a piece he had held onto carefully, a reminder of a past that now seemed entangled with baseless accusations and misunderstandings. At the hospital, Mary slowly woke up, her face pale and her eyes filled with a mix of shock and fear. She knew that the necklace held the key to the truth she had been seeking for so long. Doubts gnawed at her. Was Phillip really involved in Louise's disappearance, or did the necklace point to something far more complicated? The case had suddenly taken a turn she hadn't anticipated. Investigator Simon Reynolds, a seasoned detective known for his relentless pursuit of justice, was assigned to uncover the truth about the necklace. Simon was no stranger to cases that didn't add up, and he sensed that something deeper was at play here. He set out to trace the origins of the necklace, aware that what seemed like a minor detail might actually crack the case wide open. This wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was a vital link between Mary's painful past and Phillip's troubled present. Determined to uncover the truth, Simon dove headfirst into the investigation. Meanwhile, Mary was left wrestling with a flood of questions. What exactly was Phillip's connection to her daughter? And, most crucially, was she finally on the brink of discovering what had really happened to Louise all those years ago? Simon's office quickly became buried under a mountain of papers and files, a testament to his intense focus on the case since the day Mary had collapsed in court. The necklace, now safely stored in an evidence bag on his desk, seemed to glow under the dim office light, as if it held an untold story, a secret that had been kept hidden for too long. Simon was thorough in his work, always preferring cold, hard facts to speculation. His years of experience had taught him that the smallest details often held the biggest clues. He began by tracking the necklace's origin, contacting local jewelers and combing through old purchase records. After days of grueling research, he found a breakthrough. The necklace had been custom-made 12 years ago, precisely around the time Louise had disappeared. It had been sold to an anonymous buyer, a man who paid in cash and left without a trace. This discovery only deepened the mystery. Simon knew he needed answers, and Phillip was the only person who could provide them. The tension was palpable when Philip was brought into the interrogation room. Though he maintained a calm exterior, there was an undeniable weariness about him. He had been in prison for years, adamant about his innocence, but now he looked like a man nearing his breaking point. "Let's cut to the chase, Philip," Simon said, tossing the evidence bag with the necklace onto the table between them. "This is a unique piece, custom-made. Who gave it to you?" Philip stared at the necklace for a moment before shifting his gaze to Simon, a flicker of pain and defiance in his eyes. "It was a gift," he replied quietly. "From some friends. That's all there is to it." "Friends?" Simon asked, leaning in slightly. "Who are these friends? If they're innocent, like you claim, why keep their names hidden?" Philip shook his head, his eyes never leaving Simon's. "I can't say. They have nothing to do with this. And neither do I. I had nothing to do with what happened to Louise. I swear." Simon let out a frustrated sigh. Philip's refusal to cooperate only made him seem more suspicious. Without more answers, Simon had no choice but to change tactics. Back in his office, he decided to dig deeper into Philip's past. There had to be more to the story than what was being revealed. Simon delved deeper into the investigation, revisiting old missing person reports in search of connections that might tie Philip or his enigmatic friends to Louise's case. As he spent countless sleepless nights combing through documents, Simon began to notice an unsettling trend. Several unsolved disappearances seemed to have an indirect connection to Philip. Most of the cases involved young women who vanished under mysterious circumstances, and in at least 2 of those cases, Philip's name had surfaced in witness statements, though only in passing. As Simon pressed on, he uncovered evidence of corruption within the police department. Reports that should have been filed were missing, and key documents had been either altered or mysteriously removed. It was becoming clear that someone was actively trying to bury the past and steer the investigation away from the truth. The pieces were beginning to fit together, and Simon's suspicions grew. He was certain there was a larger conspiracy at play, with Philip caught in the middle, just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Realizing the depth of the corruption, Simon decided to confront some of his colleagues. He knew that this quest for justice could lead him into dangerous territory, even turning some of his supposed allies into enemies. During a tense conversation with a superior officer, Simon received a veiled warning. "Let it go, Simon. This case is already more complicated than it needs to be." Though the words were calm, Simon knew they held a deeper meaning. He was getting too close to uncovering truths that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. But giving up wasn't in Simon's nature. Each new clue only fueled his determination. The connections between the necklace and the unresolved disappearances suggested that Philip might be both a victim and an unwitting pawn in a far darker scheme. Simon made a vow. He would uncover what really happened to Louise, and if Philip was innocent, he would clear his name. But to do so, he would have to look past the surface and brace himself for the possibility that the real threat wasn't just criminals, but those who were supposed to uphold the law. Back in his cluttered office, Simon held the necklace once more, turning it over in his hands, convinced that this small trinket was the key to unraveling the entire mystery. He picked up the phone and reached out to an old contact, someone beyond the reach of the corrupt officers who had been tampering with the case. Simon was determined to dig deeper, to expose the lies and deceptions that had been buried for so long. As Simon plunged further into the investigation, he uncovered something even more alarming. The name, the Sentinels. The Sentinels were a shadowy organization mentioned only in whispers, their name a ghostly presence in the criminal underworld. Simon quickly realized that they operated behind the scenes with a well-organized structure that made them almost untouchable. What had initially seemed like a series of unrelated disappearances was now shaping up to be part of a much larger, sinister operation. The deeper Simon went, the more he learned about the Sentinels. They had a long history of involvement in disappearances, but their influence extended far beyond crime. They had powerful connections, including ties to high-ranking officials and legitimate businesses, making them nearly invulnerable. Simon re-examined old reports, now recognizing the Sentinel's methods in the background of many unsolved cases. People vanished without a trace, and anyone who got too close to the truth was swiftly discouraged, either through bribes, threats, or worse. As Simon pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the Sentinel's network was vast and deeply entrenched. Informants and colleagues spoke in hushed tones about police officers being paid off to cover up the group's operations. The signs of corruption were everywhere, and Simon knew that with each new discovery, he was putting himself in greater danger. Despite these risks, Simon pressed on. He knew that to bring the Sentinels down, he needed more than just rumors. He needed hard evidence that would hold up in court. Every document he analyzed brought him closer to the truth, but the identities of the group's leaders remained elusive. Meanwhile, Phillip Matthews remained in prison, aware that Simon was closing in on the truth. Phillip had always known more about Louise's disappearance than he had let on, but he had chosen to stay silent, believing that the truth would eventually surface without his direct involvement. From his cell, Phillip watched as Simon's investigation inched closer to unraveling the dark secret that had been buried for so long. The complexity of the case continued to grow, and Simon was now entangled in a web of lies, corruption, and power. The realization that some of his fellow officers were compromised added another layer of difficulty. He had to move cautiously, trusting no one. The department had become a minefield of potential betrayals, and Simon could not afford to let anyone know what he had discovered. Determined to protect his investigation, Simon worked in secret. He kept his findings to himself, fearing that if the wrong person learned what he knew, it could jeopardize the entire case. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, and the tension within the department was palpable. Simon spent his days and nights poring over files alone, knowing that any slip could bring the entire investigation crashing down. In this tense atmosphere, Simon arranged a secret meeting with a reliable informant, someone who operated outside the department but had valuable connections in the criminal underworld. They agreed to meet in an abandoned warehouse, far from any prying eyes or recording devices. Simon hoped that this meeting would provide the breakthrough he needed to finally bring the case to its conclusion. He knew that once the truth about the Sentinels was revealed, the fallout would change everything. The informant, a man with a complicated past but a reputation for delivering reliable information, showed up exactly on time, scanning his surroundings cautiously. He knew the dangers involved in speaking to a police investigator, especially about something as dangerous as the Sentinels. Lighting a cigarette, he spoke in a low, deliberate tone. "The Sentinels are bigger than you think, Simon," he said, his eyes flicking around the empty warehouse. "They've got people everywhere. Some are even on your own team." Simon nodded, not surprised by the betrayal within the force but hungry for more details. "I need something solid. Who's running the Sentinels? How do they operate?" Taking a long drag from his cigarette, the informant gave Simon a hard look. "There's a name you need to know, Logan Swanson. He's at the top, and he's tied directly to Louise, the judge's daughter." Simon's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean by direct connection?" "Is Louise still alive?" The informant nodded grimly. "Yeah, she's alive. She's been with Logan all this time. I don't know the full details of how or why she got involved with him, but Logan's dangerous, and Louise is wrapped up in something much bigger than just a disappearance." This bombshell altered everything for Simon. Louise wasn't just another victim. She was at the heart of a complex web of manipulation and power, with Logan Swanson pulling the strings. Meanwhile, Phillip, who had been under suspicion all these years, seemed more like an unfortunate bystander, caught up in a twisted game and falsely accused. Back in his office, Simon replayed the informant's words over and over in his mind, trying to make sense of all the pieces. He knew now that the key to unraveling the mystery lay with Logan Swanson. To break apart the Sentinels and clear Phillip's name, Simon would have to tread carefully. The stakes were high, and any misstep could cost him everything. Simon sensed the investigation was nearing its peak. After weeks of relentless digging, chasing leads, and navigating the constant threat of betrayal, Simon finally tracked down Logan Swanson. The operation to apprehend him was planned with the utmost caution, kept far away from prying eyes that might warn Logan of their approach. On the day of the raid, Simon's team moved silently through the thick forest surrounding Logan's remote estate. The house stood secluded, surrounded by dense trees, as if nature itself conspired to hide whatever took place inside. The raid was swift. Doors were smashed in, and the officers surged through the house, clearing each room in quick succession. Logan was found lounging in the living room, caught off guard but offering no resistance. Simon thought he was on the verge of finally getting the answers he had been chasing, but what happened next stunned him. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, Louise appeared, alive and well. Her face was serene, almost too calm considering the chaos unfolding around her. She didn't look like a victim at all. In fact, she seemed like she had been expecting this moment. Simon stood speechless for a moment, staring at Louise, the missing daughter of Judge Mary dos Santos, who had vanished 12 years ago. Louise, who everyone thought had been kidnapped, was here, living under a fake identity with Logan Swanson. With surprising calm, Louise voluntarily turned herself over to the police. She showed no signs of fear or guilt. When questioned, she slowly began unraveling the truth. Years ago, frustrated by her mother's controlling nature and constant judgment, Louise had decided to run away. Logan, who had been her boyfriend at the time, offered her a way out, a chance to escape her stifling life and start fresh. Together, they meticulously planned her disappearance. The kidnapping that everyone, including Judge Mary, had believed to be a tragedy, was a carefully crafted illusion. And the necklace that had triggered so much emotion in court? It was just a piece of the elaborate ruse Louise had orchestrated. Simon listened intently as Louise confessed that the feared organization, the Sentinels, didn't exist in the way people thought. It was all a fabrication, a myth used by corrupt police officers to justify their failures and cover up their own illegal activities. There was no vast criminal network pulling strings from the shadows. Instead, it was a smokescreen, and those who believed in it were left chasing ghosts while the real criminals went unnoticed. Phillip, the man who had maintained his innocence from the start, had been a pawn in this game. He had known Louise's whereabouts the entire time, but had remained silent to protect her and Logan, enduring years of imprisonment for crimes he never committed. His loyalty, though well-intentioned, had led him into a nightmare that nearly destroyed him. As the truth emerged, Simon felt a mix of relief and frustration. He had successfully unraveled the twisted web of lies and exposed corruption within the police force. But the reality that Louise had chosen this path voluntarily, without a thought for those she had hurt, left a bitter taste. The whole situation was a reflection of human weakness, deception, and selfishness. Though justice was finally served, it came at a steep price. News of Louise's survival spread quickly, causing a wave of shock and disbelief that rippled through the courtroom, the media, and most of all, through Judge Mary dos Santos. For Mary, what should have been a moment of joy became a storm of conflicting emotions: anger, heartbreak, guilt, and a sliver of hope. The daughter she had mourned for so long was alive, but the reasons behind her disappearance were a painful betrayal that Mary could barely process. Unable to stay away, Mary made the agonizing journey to see her daughter, now held for questioning. As the car sped toward the police station, Mary's thoughts raced. She had always been a protective mother, maybe too much so, and the weight of that realization pressed down on her. Was her need for control what had driven Louise away? Was she to blame for the mess that had unraveled? When she arrived at the interview room, Mary paused at the door, her heart heavy. Through the glass, she saw Louise sitting there, composed and quiet. She looked older, her face lined with the hard lessons of the years, but that same determination Mary remembered from her teenage daughter was still present. Finally entering the room, Mary stood before her daughter, their eyes locking in a moment of silent recognition. The air was thick with unspoken words, and for a few long moments neither of them spoke. Then Mary, her voice shaky with emotion, broke the silence. "Why, Louise? Why did you do this?" she asked, barely able to hold back tears. Louise took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Mom, I needed to be free. I loved Logan, but you never accepted him. You always tried to control everything about my life, like you knew what was best for me. I couldn't live like that anymore." Mary shook her head, struggling to take in her daughter's words. "So, you thought running away was the answer? Making everyone believe you were dead or kidnapped?" Mary's voice trembled with anger and pain. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? To Phillip?" Louise lowered her eyes, visibly shaken by the mention of Phillip. "I know, Mom. I'm so sorry. I never intended for things to spiral like this. The necklace Phillip wore, it was a gift from us. From Logan and me. It was supposed to symbolize our friendship, that no matter what, we'd always be connected. Phillip got dragged into all of this because of me, and I never wanted him to suffer." Louise's confession hit Mary hard. The judge had always believed she was doing the right thing by protecting her daughter, but now, facing the truth, she realized that her own actions might have driven Louise into Logan's arms and a life of deceit. Mary's mind swirled with questions, doubts about the decisions she had made over the years, regrets about what she could have done differently. "You can't even begin to understand the torment I've been through, thinking you were gone, dead, or worse," Mary whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of her emotions. "And Phillip, I judged an innocent man. I condemned him without ever really hearing him out, without understanding." Louise stepped closer, gently taking her mother's trembling hand. "I know nothing I say can change what happened, Mom. But everything I did because I was desperate. I wanted to be free. And for all the hurt I've caused, I'm truly sorry." Mary gazed into her daughter's eyes, seeing a reflection of her own mistakes. The anger that had built up inside her began to fade, replaced by a painful realization that both of them had been victims of their own choices. They embraced, a heavy hug that carried the weight of years of separation, misunderstanding, and regret. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start, a moment where mother and daughter stood face to face, not as adversaries, but as two people trying to heal. Mary, still grappling with a whirlwind of emotions, left the room with a new sense of determination. She knew there was much to be done. She needed to correct the wrongs she had contributed to, starting with Phillip. Clearing his name had become her mission, and she was ready to face the consequences of her past decisions. More than anything, Mary wanted to rebuild her relationship with Louise, but she understood that the journey toward forgiveness would be long and difficult. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was different. It was still crowded, but the tension had shifted. Phillip Matthews' case, once clouded with suspicion and uncertainty, was now illuminated by Simon Reynolds' investigation and Louise's revelations. The trial had been reopened, and this time there was hope that justice would finally be served. Simon sat quietly, watching the proceedings with a sense of satisfaction and relief. The truth he had fought so hard to uncover was finally out in the open. The evidence he had gathered, testimonies, documents, and proof that the so-called Sentinels organization was nothing more than a fabrication, was now being presented in court. The defense attorneys skillfully laid out the flaws in the original case, exposing the manipulations and corruption that had led to Phillip's wrongful conviction. Mary dos Santos, no longer presiding over the trial, sat in the audience as a witness, a mother, and someone seeking redemption. It was a strange and uncomfortable role for her, but she knew it was her duty to be there. She had prepared herself for the moment when she would testify, knowing her words could change everything. When the time came, Mary stood and walked to the witness stand. The courtroom fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone present understood the significance of what was about to happen. Mary looked at Phillip, then at the judge, before taking a deep breath. "Your Honor, members of the court, and everyone here," Mary began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm here today not just as someone who watched the justice system fail, but as someone who personally failed to see the truth." She continued, admitting her mistake in not investigating Phillip's claims properly. She explained how her own grief, fear, and pain had blinded her to the facts, and how those emotions had caused her to make judgments without truly understanding the situation. Mary spoke about Louise, about the pressures she had placed on her daughter, and how those pressures had contributed to the tragedy that unfolded. "Phillip Matthews is an innocent man," Mary declared, her voice cracking as tears welled up in her eyes. "He was dragged into this nightmare because of choices I helped create. I ask for forgiveness, from him, from this court, and from all those who have suffered because of the injustice that persisted for so long." The courtroom remained silent as Mary returned to her seat. Her public admission, her heartfelt apology, was a rare and powerful moment. Few had ever seen a respected figure like her confess to such a profound failure, and the weight of her words could be seen on the faces of everyone in the room. Phillip, sitting at the defendant's bench, looked deeply moved. He had fought for years to prove his innocence, and now, finally, people were beginning to see the truth. His eyes softened as he looked at Mary, not with anger or resentment, but with a sense of quiet understanding. As the trial continued, the evidence that had once condemned Phillip was systematically dismantled. Simon's tireless efforts, coupled with Louise's revelations, left little room for doubt. The fabricated existence of the Sentinels, the corruption within the police force, and the role of Mary's personal struggles all came to light, transforming the case from one of guilt and suspicion to one of tragic misunderstanding and redemption. When the verdict was finally delivered, Phillip Matthews was acquitted of all charges. The courtroom erupted in a wave of quiet relief, the heavy burden of injustice finally lifted. Mary, watching from her seat, felt a mixture of emotions: joy, guilt, and a deep sense of responsibility. She had helped bring Phillip's nightmare to an end, but the road to healing, both for her and for Phillip, was just beginning. For Simon, the case marked the end of a long and difficult journey. He had exposed the truth, uncovered corruption, and brought justice where it had once been denied. As he left the courtroom, he knew that his work had made a difference, not just in the lives of those involved, but in a system that needed change. As for Mary and Louise, their journey was far from over. Their relationship, fractured by years of lies and misunderstandings, would take time to mend. But for the first time in years, they were willing to try. And in that, there was hope. He knew that the truth was finally being heard. With the new evidence presented and Mary's heartfelt testimony, it didn't take long for the judge to reach a decision. Phillip Matthews was declared innocent of all charges, and the accusations against him were officially dropped. The room filled with murmurs and soft applause as Phillip let out a deep breath, finally feeling the weight of injustice lift from his shoulders after so many years of suffering. Meanwhile, Simon's relentless work was beginning to yield results beyond the courtroom. The corrupt system within the police force, which had allowed the myth of the Sentinels to persist, was being dismantled piece by piece. Internal investigations had been launched, and the officers who had played a role in the cover-ups were starting to be identified and held accountable. Simon, who had risked so much to uncover the truth, was publicly praised for his integrity and determination, proving that there were still those within the police who fought for what was right. After the hearing, Phillip approached Mary. There were no words exchanged at first, but the look they shared spoke volumes. It was a moment of mutual understanding, an acknowledgment of the mistakes made and a silent agreement to move forward without harboring any resentment. Mary, Phillip, and Simon left the courtroom together, walking into the clear afternoon sky. The truth had finally been revealed, bringing a sense of peace with it. Though there was still much to repair, the first major step toward justice had been taken. For Mary, it marked the beginning of a long journey toward forgiveness, both for Phillip and Louise, but also for herself. Simon, watching the events unfold, felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He knew the battle for justice was far from over, but at that moment he could take a breath, knowing he had played his part in righting a wrong that had caused so much pain. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but the most important victory had been achieved. Later, as the soft light of late afternoon bathed the house where Mary, Louise, and Logan were gathered, there was a hesitant calm settling over the family. It was the first time in years they had been together, and though the circumstances were far from ideal, there was a sense of relief in the air. The tension and pain of the past days were starting to give way to the possibility of healing, as each of them tried to find their place amid the wreckage of their shared history. Mary, watching Louise now by Logan's side, saw her daughter in a new light. She no longer saw a rebellious teenager, but a woman who had fought for her freedom and her love, even if those choices had caused pain. For the first time, Mary understood that Louise's actions weren't just driven by defiance, but by a deep desire to live life on her own terms, free from the restraints that Mary had unknowingly placed on her. Sitting around the table, Mary, Louise, and Logan began talking about the future. There was much to rebuild and many difficult conversations to have, but the most important thing was that they were all willing to try. Louise, with a soft smile, held Logan's hand, and for the first time, Mary didn't feel challenged by the sight. Instead, she saw it as a symbol of the love that had sustained Louise through years of uncertainty. Breaking the silence, Mary spoke softly. "I know this won't be easy," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "But I want to try. I want to be here, to support you both, and to welcome my grandchild with an open heart." Louise smiled, squeezing her mother's hand. "Thank you, Mom. That means more to us than you know. We've all made difficult choices, but we're ready to start fresh. All of us." Logan, who had been the source of so much tension between Louise and Mary, looked at the judge with respect. "I've always wanted what's best for Louise, Mrs. Mary," he said sincerely. "I never wanted to take her away from you. Now, I just want us to move forward together as a family, no matter our past differences." Mary nodded, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't expected. This acceptance, small as it was, felt like the first real step toward forgiveness. For so long, fear and pride had kept her from seeing things clearly, but now she was ready to move past it. The future, with the impending arrival of Louise's baby, felt like a fresh start, a chance to rewrite the story. They decided to return to the city where everything had begun, ready to face the future with lessons learned from the past. Mary's old home would be renovated, not just in structure, but in spirit, rebuilt to embrace the changes that time and experience had brought. Philip, though not present at this family reunion, remained an important part of their lives. He had moved to a quiet town far from the chaos that had once consumed him, seeking peace after so many years of turmoil. Still, he kept in touch with Louise and Logan, maintaining the bonds of friendship that had always been there, even if hidden beneath the storm. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the horizon, Mary, Louise, and Logan sat in quiet reflection, each lost in their thoughts, yet united by an invisible thread of hope. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was theirs to shape, filled with new possibilities, new smiles, and above all, the peace they had all been searching for. For Mary, Louise, and Logan, this was the beginning of a new journey. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer wounds to be hidden. They were now part of a story that had made them stronger. They were ready to build a life where the mistakes of the past served only as reminders of what paths not to follow again. With the arrival of the baby, the family anticipated a future filled with challenges, but also with joy. And together, they knew they could face whatever came their way, as long as they stayed united. As night fell, with the stars shining brightly overhead, there was a quiet certainty that, finally, they were all exactly where they needed to be, together and ready to start anew.